Sparks fly as Representative Jasmine Crockett confronts Chief Justice John Roberts in a fiery congressional hearing, exposing Supreme Court ethics flaws and igniting a battle for judicial accountability. The hearing room buzzed with anticipation, a charged atmosphere crackling like a storm about to break. Rows of lawmakers, staffers, and reporters filled the chamber, their eyes fixed on the witness table where Chief Justice John Roberts sat, his expression composed but guarded. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising star from Texas known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding commitment to justice, leaned forward, her notes meticulously arranged. The topic: the Supreme Court's ethical standards, or, as Crockett would soon argue, the lack thereof. This was no ordinary congressional oversight session. It was a showdown, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Crockett's reputation preceded her. A former public defender and civil rights attorney, she'd earned her stripes in courtrooms long before entering Congress. Her questioning style was surgical, blending legal precision with a moral clarity that could disarm even the most seasoned opponents. Roberts, the leader of the nation's highest court, was no stranger to scrutiny, but today felt different. The public's trust in the judiciary had been eroding, battered by reports of justices accepting lavish gifts, undisclosed, trips and cozy ties with political donors. Crockett wasn't here to play nice. She was here to demand answers. "Chief Justice Roberts," Crockett began, her voice steady but laced with an edge that silenced the room. "The American people deserve a Supreme Court they can trust. Yet, time and again, we see headlines exposing justices' connections to billionaire donors, unreported gifts, and conflicts of interest. How do you justify this erosion of public confidence?" The question landed like a grenade, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Roberts adjusted his glasses, his face betraying a flicker of discomfort, before settling into a practiced neutrality. "Thank you, Representative," Roberts replied, his tone measured. "The Supreme Court operates with the highest ethical standards. Our justices are committed to impartiality, and we have robust internal processes to ensure compliance with judicial ethics." His words were smooth, rehearsed, but they didn't satisfy Crockett. She leaned in, her eyes locked on his, undeterred by his attempt to deflect. "With all due respect, Chief Justice," she said, her voice rising slightly, "those robust processes haven't stopped justices from attending exclusive retreats funded by political operatives or failing to disclose financial ties to litigants before the court. The public isn't blind. They see a system that protects its own while preaching impartiality." The room grew quieter, the weight of her words sinking in. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a story that would dominate headlines. Roberts shifted in his seat, his composure tested. "The judiciary is not a political institution," he countered. "Our role is to interpret the law, not to bend to public opinion or media narratives." His voice carried authority, but Crockett wasn't intimidated. She flipped open a binder, revealing a stack of documents, reports, financial disclosures, and news clippings that she'd spent weeks compiling. "Let's talk specifics," she said, holding up a page. "In 2023, a justice accepted a luxury fishing trip from a donor with cases pending before the court. No disclosure, no recusal. How does that align with your highest ethical standards?" The question was a direct hit, and the audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. Roberts opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett wasn't finished. "And before you answer, let's not forget the spouse of another justice actively engaging in political advocacy, while cases tied to those causes were under review. Where's the accountability, Chief Justice?" The room felt electric, the tension palpable. Roberts, usually unflappable, seemed caught off guard by Crockett's command of the facts and her unrelenting pace. He cleared his throat, searching for a response that could quell the rising tide of scrutiny. "Representative, these matters are complex," he began, but Crockett cut him off, her voice now a controlled burn. "Complex," she said, her tone sharp but composed. "The American people don't need complexity. They need transparency. They need to know their justices aren't swayed by wealth or influence." She paused, letting the silence amplify her point. "If the Supreme Court can't police itself, who will?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the hearing room buzzed with whispers. Crockett's words weren't just a challenge. They were a warning. This was only the beginning, and she was just getting started. The hearing room's whispers grew louder, a restless hum that mirrored the unease Crockett had unleashed. Her question, "If the Supreme Court can't police itself, who will?" still echoed, unanswered, as Chief Justice John Roberts gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. Crockett's gaze didn't waver, her calm intensity a stark contrast to the storm she'd ignited. She wasn't here to score points. She was here to dismantle excuses, and Roberts knew it. "Representative Crockett," Roberts said, his voice tighter now, "the judiciary operates independently to avoid external pressures. Suggesting oversight risks undermining that independence." His words were a shield, but Crockett saw the cracks. She tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. Not mocking, but confident, as if she'd anticipated this defense. "Independence isn't a blank check," she replied, her voice cutting through the room's tension like a blade. "It's a responsibility. When justices dine with donors who have cases before the court, that's not independence. It's influence, and the public sees it, even if you don't." The audience stirred, a few gasps punctuating the silence. Crockett's words were bold, bordering on confrontational, but her delivery was unshakable, grounded in a lawyer's precision. She reached for another document, sliding it across the table toward Roberts. "This is a 2024 ethics complaint filed against a justice for failing to report a $50,000 gift from a corporate executive. The complaint was dismissed internally, no explanation given. Can you tell us why?" Her question was a trap, and Roberts' hesitation betrayed his struggle to navigate it. He glanced at the document, his jaw tightening. "Internal matters are handled discreetly to protect the court's integrity," he said, but the words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Crockett pounced, her voice rising with controlled indignation. "Discreetly? Chief Justice, dismissing complaints without transparency isn't integrity. It's secrecy. The public deserves to know why a justice's ethics violation was swept under the rug." The room erupted in murmurs, reporters typing furiously as the exchange escalated. Roberts leaned forward, his composure fraying. "The court is not a public spectacle," he said, his tone sharp. "We resolve these issues privately to maintain trust." Crockett didn't flinch. "Trust?" she shot back. "Trust is earned, not demanded. When justices hide behind private resolutions while cozying up to power, they're not maintaining trust, they're breaking it." Her words landed like a thunderclap, and even Roberts' allies in the room shifted uncomfortably. She pressed on, her rhythm relentless. "Let's talk about recusal," she said, flipping to another page in her binder. "In 2022, a justice ruled on a case involving a company tied to their spouse's consulting firm. No recusal, no disclosure. The public only learned about it through investigative reporting. How does that square with your claim of robust processes?" The question was surgical, exposing the gap between Roberts' assurances and reality. The audience leaned in, sensing blood in the water. Roberts' face reddened slightly, his voice strained. "Recusal decisions are made by individual justices based on careful consideration," he said. "We trust their judgment." Crockett raised an eyebrow, her silence more damning than any retort. "Trust their judgment?" she finally said, her tone laced with disbelief. "When their judgment allows conflicts of interest to go unchecked, that's not a system. It's a loophole." The room buzzed again, the energy shifting as Crockett's arguments gained traction. She leaned back, letting the weight of her Words settle. Chief Justice, you lead the highest court in the land. Your justices wield immense power, shaping lives and laws for generations. But power without accountability breeds distrust. If you won't hold your court to a higher standard, Congress will. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable, and Roberts' eyes narrowed, recognizing the gauntlet she'd thrown down. The hearing's momentum had shifted, Crockett's relentless questioning exposing vulnerabilities Roberts hadn't anticipated. He opened his mouth to respond, but the committee chair banged the gavel, calling a brief recess. As the room erupted in chatter, Crockett gathered her notes, her expression calm but resolute. Roberts stared ahead, his face a mask of frustration. The battle was far from over, and Crockett was ready to push harder. The recess ended, and the hearing room snapped back to life, the air thick with unresolved tension. Representatives shuffled papers, reporters whispered predictions, and spectators craned their necks as Chief Justice John Roberts returned to the witness table, his expression now a steely mask of determination. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her notes stacked neatly but her eyes burning with purpose. The gavel fell, signaling the resumption, and Crockett wasted no time. She'd exposed cracks in Roberts's defense before. The break. Now, she aimed to widen them. Chief Justice, Crockett began, her voice clear and commanding. Before the recess, you spoke of trust in the judiciary. But trust isn't built on assurances. It's built on actions. So let's discuss the Supreme Court's code of conduct, or rather, the lack of one. The room hushed, her words slicing through the lingering buzz. Roberts stiffened, sensing the shift to even more perilous ground. Other federal judges are bound by a mandatory ethics code, Crockett continued. Yet the Supreme Court, the most powerful court in the nation, operates without one. Why? Roberts cleared his throat, his tone deliberately even. The Supreme Court has always adhered to the highest ethical principles, Representative. A formal code is unnecessary when justices are guided by integrity. His response was polished, but Crockett's eyes narrowed, catching the dodge. She leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with challenge. Integrity isn't a substitute for accountability, she said. Every other federal judge answers to a clear, enforceable code. Why should the Supreme Court be exempt? Are your justices above the rules? The question was a spark, igniting murmurs across the room. Roberts' jaw tightened, his composure tested by the directness of her attack. The Supreme Court's unique role requires flexibility, he replied, his voice tinged with defensiveness. A rigid code could be weaponized to undermine our independence. Crockett didn't blink. She reached for a document, holding it up for emphasis. This is the Judicial Conference's Code of Conduct for Federal Judges, she said. It mandates transparency, recusal for conflicts, and limits on gifts. Are you saying these rules threaten independence? Or is it just inconvenient for your court to follow them? The audience stirred, sensing the trap. Roberts hesitated, his fingers tapping the table. The judiciary must remain free from external pressures, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Crockett seized the opening, her voice rising with controlled intensity. External pressures? She countered. The pressure here is public trust, Chief Justice. When justices accept undisclosed trips or rule on cases tied to their personal ties, that's not freedom. It's a conflict. And the public pays the price. She flipped to another page, her movements deliberate. In 2024, a poll showed 70% of Americans believe the Supreme Court is influenced by politics. 70%. That's not a conspiracy, it's a crisis. And your refusal to adopt a binding ethics code only fuels it. The room buzzed, reporters scribbling as Crockett's words resonated. Roberts leaned forward, his voice sharper now. The court's legitimacy doesn't depend on polls, Representative. It depends on our adherence to the law. Crockett's eyes flashed, undeterred. Legitimacy depends on trust, she shot back. And trust is crumbling when justices act like they're untouchable. If the court won't regulate itself, why should the public believe it's impartial? Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Robert's face flushed, his restraint fraying. "The court is not a political body," he said, his tone almost biting. "We don't bend to public opinion." "Then why does it look like you bend to power?" Crockett asked, her voice calm but piercing. The room gasped, the boldness of her words electrifying. She held up another document, a timeline of justices' interactions with wealthy donors. "These aren't isolated incidents," she said. "They're a pattern, and patterns erode confidence. If you won't address them, Congress will." The threat was clear, and Robert's eyes narrowed, his silence louder than any retort. The committee chair glanced at the clock, signaling time was running short. Crockett gathered her papers, her expression resolute. Roberts stared back, his frustration palpable. The room pulsed with anticipation, sensing the confrontation was far from over. Crockett had landed blow after blow, and the next round promised even more fire. The hearing room vibrated with unspoken stakes, as the committee chair's glance at the clock did little to cool the charged atmosphere. Representative Jasmine Crockett, unfazed by the ticking seconds, straightened her notes, her resolve a quiet force that seemed to fill the space. Chief Justice John Roberts, his frustration now a visible simmer, adjusted his posture, bracing for the next onslaught. Crockett had already shaken his defenses, and the audience, lawmakers, reporters, and spectators alike, leaned forward, sensing the crescendo of this clash. She wasn't done exposing the Supreme Court's vulnerabilities, and Roberts knew it. "Chief Justice," Crockett said, her voice a blend of steel and serenity, "you've defended the court's independence, but independence doesn't mean immunity. Let's talk about enforcement. When a justice violates ethical norms, what happens? Who holds them accountable?" The question cut deep, and the room stilled, every ear straining for Robert's response. His lips parted, but Crockett pressed on, her rhythm unrelenting. "Because from where the public sits, it looks like nothing happens. No sanctions, no transparency, no consequences." Robert's eyes narrowed, his voice taut. "The court addresses ethical concerns internally. Representative, publicizing every allegation risks politicizing the judiciary." His tone carried a warning, but Crockett was unmoved. She slid a document across the table, a leaked memo detailing a dismissed ethics probe involving a justice's financial ties. "This," she said, her voice rising slightly, "is an internal resolution from 2023. A justice failed to disclose a $100,000 payment from a think tank with cases before the court. The probe was closed, no action taken. Can you explain why this doesn't warrant consequences?" The audience murmured, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Roberts glanced at the memo, his fingers twitching. "I'm not privy to every detail of internal deliberations," he said, his voice clipped. "Justices are trusted to act with integrity." Crockett's gaze sharpened, her response swift. "Trusted, Chief Justice, trust is a two-way street. When the public sees cover-ups instead of accountability, they don't trust, they doubt, and they're right to." She flipped to another page, her movements deliberate. "Let's try another example," she said. "In 2024, a justice's spouse was paid $200,000 by a law firm that later argued a case before the court. No recusal, no disclosure. The public only learned about it through a whistleblower. How does that look like integrity?" The question was a blade, and Robert's face tightened, his restraint fraying. "Recusal is a personal decision," he said, his voice strained. "Justices weigh their obligations carefully." Crockett leaned forward, her voice low but searing. "Carefully? When money flows from litigants to a justice's household, that's not careful. It's reckless. And it's the public who pays the price when justice looks bought. The room erupted in gasps, reporters scribbling furiously as her words reverberated. Roberts' cheeks flushed, his voice rising. The court is not for sale, Representative. These accusations are unfair and undermine our work. Unfair? Crockett shot back, her calm unshaken. What's unfair is a system that lets justices police themselves while the public loses faith. If you won't enforce accountability, you're not protecting the court. You're shielding its flaws. Her words were a thunderbolt, and even Roberts' allies in the room shifted uncomfortably. She held up a chart, a timeline of ethics scandals spanning years. This isn't one mistake, she said. It's a pattern, and patterns demand reform. Roberts leaned forward, his voice sharp. Reform risks overreach, Representative. Congress meddling in the judiciary threatens the separation of powers. Crockett didn't flinch. Meddling? Holding power to account isn't meddling, it's democracy. If the court won't act, we will. The threat was bold and the audience buzzed, sensing the stakes escalating. Roberts' eyes blazed, but he held his tongue, the silence heavy with defiance. The committee chair's raised hand did little to quell the electric tension gripping the hearing room. Representative Jasmine Crockett, her documents neatly stacked, fixed her gaze on Chief Justice John Roberts, whose barely concealed frustration seemed to radiate from his rigid posture. The room, packed with lawmakers, reporters, and spectators, hummed with anticipation, every eye locked on the two figures. At the heart of this unprecedented clash, Crockett had cornered Roberts with relentless precision, and with the session's final minutes ticking down, she was poised to deliver her closing blow. "Chief Justice," Crockett said, her voice a calm but unyielding force, "you've called. The Supreme Court a bastion of independence, yet you've dodged every question about accountability. The public isn't asking for perfection. They're asking for a court they can believe in. So let's end this with clarity. Will you commit to a binding ethics code for the Supreme Court, enforceable and transparent, to restore that belief?" The question was a gauntlet, thrown with surgical intent, and the room fell silent, the weight of her challenge palpable. Roberts' eyes flickered, his composure strained to its limit. He leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "The court's integrity is not in question, Representative. A binding code risks external interference, and I will not compromise our independence." His words were defiant, but they rang hollow against the backdrop of Crockett's meticulously laid case. She tilted her head, her expression unyielding, and countered with a quiet intensity that filled the room. "Independence isn't a shield for unaccountability," she said. "It's a privilege that demands responsibility. You speak of interference, but the real threat is a court that ignores its own flaws while preaching impartiality." She held up a final document, a proposed congressional bill for judicial ethics reform. "This bill," she said, "would mandate transparency, recusal standards, and consequences for violations. If you won't act, Chief Justice, we will. The American people deserve better." The audience erupted in murmurs, the boldness of her ultimatum electrifying. Roberts' face tightened, his voice rising with rare emotion. "Congress has no authority to dictate the court's operations," he snapped. "This is a dangerous overreach." Crockett didn't flinch, her response immediate and piercing. "Dangerous? What's dangerous is a court that hides behind power while trust crumbles. If you won't lead, Congress will step in, not to overreach, but to uphold justice." The room buzzed, reporters typing furiously as the confrontation reached its peak. Crockett leaned back, her voice softening but no less commanding. "Chief Justice, you have a choice. Lead the court toward transparency or watch the public's faith erode further. The question isn't whether reform is coming, it's whether you'll be part of it." Her words landed like a verdict, and, for the first time, Roberts seemed at a loss, his silence a concession to her momentum. The committee chair banged the gavel, signaling the session's end, but the room remained alive with energy. Crockett gathered her papers, her expression serene yet triumphant, while Roberts sat motionless, his frustration giving way to a grudging acknowledgement of her impact. As lawmakers and spectators rose, a wave of chatter swept through, many nodding, in awe of Crockett's performance. Reporters swarmed, eager to capture the moment, while social media lit up with clips of her dismantling Roberts' defenses. In the days that followed, Crockett's words reverberated beyond the hearing room. The proposed ethics bill gained traction, fueled by public outcry and her unassailable arguments. Editorials praised her as a voice for accountability, and grassroots campaigns rallied behind her call for reform. While Roberts and the court resisted, the pressure mounted, forcing internal discussions about a voluntary ethics code, a small but significant shift. Crockett's confrontation had sparked a movement, proving that one voice, armed with truth and tenacity, could challenge even the highest powers. As she left the Capitol that evening, Crockett glanced back at the hearing room, a quiet smile crossing her face. She hadn't just questioned a Chief Justice, she'd redefined the fight for justice itself. The Supreme Court would never be the same, and neither would the public's demand for a judiciary worthy of their trust. The battle was won, and the conversation she'd ignited would shape the future.